There he is.
Whoa, right when I hit record. The container is now open. Our Eros series takes us to none other than Robert Kandell. His path is a winding one, from the American dream to psychedelic exploration to orgasmic meditation to the life of a thought leader to that of a fractional CFO. He tells us how and why he left his standard boilerplate life at 28 to discover a world full of profound authenticity and erotic fulfillment. And it all starts at Burning Man, obviously. To find more Robert Kandell, check out his website, robertkandell.com. His book, Unhidden, a book for men and those confused by them, can be found online. And I recommend the audiobook. You can find his business mastery, forecast, and mastermind group at yourff.io. That's yourff.io. And before we jump in, I'd just like to mention that we talk about OneTaste. This is an organization that created a lot of tools that have spread throughout the personal development, authentic relating, spiritual awakening communities, both in the United States and throughout the world. But they are also an organization that created a lot of damage and pain. Robert does a great job describing why the world this organization created was a space where so many people found so much transformation, but also why it is extremely important that we maintain spaces to listen to the voices of people who were harmed. It isn't the whole conversation, but it does come up, and I want listeners and viewers to just be aware of the content. So now, on with our interview with Robert Kandell. Robert Kandell, welcome to the container.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
You came highly recommended from one Mark Benetow, who is his name has a lot of truck around here. And then we read your book Unhidden.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And right now we're in the middle of this Eros series where we're trying to develop more mindful, spirit-forward ways of engaging the erotic. And Unhidden comes at it, I think, from a more like masculine focus point of view, which I think is actually pretty unique in the space. I think a lot of writing on sexuality and romance for men is like how to get more of it rather than how to do it in a more mindful, like spirit forward way. It's like, how can I get as much as possible?
Quantity over quality.
Absolutely. So that's just to, give a little bit of a peek into why we wanted you on the podcast. And yeah, so I'd like to give you some space to tell the listeners like who you are and how your path led you to write a book like Unhidden.
Great. It's really fun to be here. I always like to interview and talk and share ideas. My story is a fascinating one. I consider myself normal till I was around 28. I was living that American dream, the path laid out to me by society, my religion, my parents, and I was doing really well. 28, six-figure income, house in San Francisco, wife, room for the kids, all that. And then my first wife, Carol, just wasn't happy. And she just said, I think there's more. And I was like, really? Because I thought we had achieved the American dream. And little did I know that we had achieved the American mediocrity. We had hit that very normal status quo which meant good relating, not a lot of fighting, not a lot of sex, just friends. We were really friends. And she said to me, "Hey, do you want to go to Burning Man?" And I was like, "No, I really don't." And this was 1998. I think it was a mere 18,000 people at that point. It was a much smaller version of it. And it was sort of this hippie fringe. I'd seen a picture book with a lot of mud encrusted people walking naked on the playa. And I was like, "No, this is not for me. Yuppies don't belong at Burning Man." And so I said, "Okay, let's go." And what happened was I had really what's called a spiritual awakening in that first trip. We drove in, I got out of the car, the thought "you're home" popped in my head. We started to have, conversations that we never had before. We discovered that there was so much more to our sexuality that was not ever discussed. It was hidden, to use that term, and it just opened up this whole new possibility. And I really want to credit Carol for being my white rabbit that I chased down the rabbit hole into this whole other world. So we went back to San Francisco. We started to explore. We had some really horrible experiences. We had some really powerful experiences. It was the height of wondrous times. San Francisco was the rave culture was starting. Started to investigate and play with psychedelics. Started to hang out with some fringe communities that were teaching sexuality, and to make a very long story short, ended up in 2004 starting a company called OneTaste. OneTaste wanted to bring conscious sexuality into the world conversation, invested in that heavily for 10 years, left basically because I was out of agreement with the direction of the company. And if anyone knows, that direction went pretty dark. That's a whole other story that I can talk very briefly about because there is a government court case in January against my business partner. So I won't talk too much about that. But it was an amazing experience for me of the highest highs and the lowest lows thrown into community and opportunity. Mastered a practice called orgasmic meditation, learned man-woman dynamics, taught over 400 workshops, coached over 200 people, about 4,000 sessions. So really in that 10-year was manic. Left in 2014, ended up in Venice Beach, California with a blank slate, started a consulting business with the idea to be a thought leader and a fractional CFO. The fractional CFO to support the thought leader, had the opportunity to do a podcast and write the book, which was amazing. And then 2019 said, I don't really want to do this anymore. The thought leader aspect, it just, whatever that book scratched that itch, and then migrated more into fractional CFO work. And here I am in 2024, living on 12.3 acres in rural North Carolina and having a blast.
Wow.
That's really interesting. Something really fascinating about that. I feel like I want to just like immediately dive in and scrap any of the questions I had written down, because OneTaste keeps popping up as like the source of so many things that are now, I think, like essential parts of Western spirituality. They like either went through OneTaste or like, yeah, that's where a lot of it got kind of coded into how it spread. For good and for bad, I guess, because there were some shadows involved in OneTaste, but there's
Definitely.
shadows involved in any major human enterprise. So
agreed.
But like we've been working with the Existential Kink book and Carolyn Elliott, who, like, a lot of that comes from orgasmic meditation and the idea of using the power and the positive glow of orgasm as this like spiritual superpower or something. And so now I'm like hearing you bring that up and hearing your experience, that feels like an interesting
Well, feel free to ask any question, and if I hear my lawyer's voice in my head saying don't answer that, I have confidence I'll have the ability. So please feel free to ask any question. I'm happy to talk about my own personal experience, and also maybe just, just if anyone's listening and anyone's been injured or hit by that dark side of orgasmic meditation, just to stop and validate. I spent a lot of time in the last 10 years, because I've been out for 10 years, listening to people who had negative experiences and just validating like your feelings are right. If I was participating in any of that, I apologize. If it happened after and no one did apologize to you, I feel bad about that. There has been a lot of shadow, a lot of negative impact that I'm aware of. And I don't think there's been enough acknowledgement of that. Regardless of what the truth is and what happened, people still feel negatively impacted by that. Positive, okay, that's a different conversation. But if you feel negatively impacted, I'm so sorry that you had that experience. And you can find me if I can do anything that I did to make amends, because that is indeed part of my life mission.
Mm.
I love that. Wow. I'm going to take a deep breath.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one question I have, which is, I guess what I notice is that the people we know and that the people we've talked to and read about that were involved with OneTaste, that some of the good that came from that were a lot of these authentic practices, like a lot of these, even some of the games. I don't know as much if circling was a part of part of OneTaste, but I'm curious. Yeah, maybe if you could speak to like some of the practices that led to deeper connection and deeper relating that you experienced.
Well, I know all the history because I was there and good friends with how it happened. So, I called it the transformational gulf around the 2004 to 2007 time period, because, or even earlier before that, there were these groups, like I said, this rave culture, and there was Arte, which is, I think the grandfather of circling, Jerry and Guy started that, and they were good friends of mine, and they actually had a location half a block down from us. We actually shared space with the Authentic SF, Decker. They were we shared the same space. So there's a lot of mixed history. When I went to circling in Boulder, get exactly what they call it, I did not do well in the circling because my lineage was very leaned in, investigatory, like questions and viewpoints, and harsh and intense and focused. And my understanding of circling, though I do not consider myself an expert in any shape or form, is one of really seeing and validating and giving space and, gently guiding. And so OneTaste, when I was there until 2014, we were pretty intense, hardcore, lean in, burn, do the push-ups where your muscles burn, it's the face of things, adversity practice, a lot about really, deep diving into the shadow, which my personal belief, 99% of people really got a lot of benefit out. And then 1% didn't and had a negative, I want to respect that 1%. But for me, the practices was a lot about, you've got, can I swear on this?
Yeah.
Yeah. You've got shit in the way, or you've got shit on your windscreen that has you unable to see. This is not a bad thing. This is your childhood. This is your society. This is your pain body. This is all the stuff that you've gathered in your lifetime. And that shit is stopping you from seeing the light, the pleasure, your joy, your power. And so OneTaste was really about just scrubbing and clearing so you could see clearly to make conscious decisions on how you want to live your life, rather than looking through a filtered, messy, thick goo that stopped you from seeing.
I'm curious, what are some of the practices that come to mind as some of the more powerful ways of cleaning that shit off the windshield?
OneTaste was a lot into journaling and writing, doing a practice where you would write down your fears on a daily basis. That's born of the AA tradition, the 12-step tradition. There was a lot of truth telling, sometimes skillfully, sometimes not. So you just basically like, you look like crap today. What's going on? Or, wow, that was really hurtful in that moment. Like all the societal niceties were kind of put aside, and we gave ourselves permission, again, in the best of times, to really call each other out. Like, you're not doing your optimal best. I see you're being highly distracted by that woman, or you're highly distracted by your work. I don't feel you. I don't see you. We're in an orgasmic meditation practice, and I can tell you're distracted. I can't feel you. What's happening? What is the withhold, the withheld communication that exists between us that's stopping from me really feeling you? And so we had very intense practices that said, okay, I can say that. And again, in the unoptimized times, it came out like an insult, and that's how it felt. And that's how it was probably intended, because I wasn't clear about my intention, blah, blah, blah. The point is that we were like Harry Potter with the wands, and sometimes we were really spot on. A lot of times we weren't, with ourselves, with our community, with our students. And I think that's where a lot of things went askew.
Mm.
Well, yeah, because I mean, just in the little experience we have in practicing withholds in our community, it's a, I mean, I want to say it's a dangerous game to play, because you have to be really centered in what is yours and what is the others, and mindful that, like, projections are real. Like, you're probably projecting, and like being clean in that space, and not, and I can imagine that with kind of higher stakes, I imagine it is higher stakes with the orgasmic meditation piece, like that could get really, really intense, because even just simple withholds that we've done in community can be like nuclear
bombs.
Something that resonates for me around that is that withholds, for listeners who don't know, withholds are like this practice where you go up to other people in a shared group or space, and you might be given a time you can do this, and then you go up to people and you share things that you've been holding back that are probably have a real negative connotation or conflict element to it. And the invitation is like, would you be willing to hear a withhold? And if they say yes, then you share it. And then the practice is that the person receiving the withhold just says thank you.
Yes,
more or less. That's kind of the practice. So just for the listeners, and the key thing there is that the person receiving the withhold doesn't know what the withhold is, so they kind of consent to it a little blind. And for many people that's okay, but you really have to calibrate to like, how much do I think this person can handle? It's like, because there's so much there is so much just blind faith when the receiver is saying yes to the withhold, that like, I think I can take it, but like they don't know if they can take it because they don't know what the withhold is. So it's like, it's so like the blowout potential is so high compared to like noticing physical sensation or something.
Well, you have to understand where the withholds came from. Withholds come from a guy named Victor Barranco that started it with a group called More. You can look up. That's kind of a shadow group. They're the grandparents of OneTaste, as I like to describe them. He was a really dynamic guy, brilliant seer, teacher in the 60s and 70s, and started this organization that, I don't think we got as big as OneTaste, but it was underground. It was huge in the 60s and 70s. They had communal houses, they had practices. He started something called MARC groups, M-A-R-K. And a mark, if those who know, in Carney terms, is someone you're trying to hook to pull them into the circus tent. And so he did this overtly. He called them MARC groups, so people would come so he could sell. And they had 3 communication games. The third was Withholds. And the story of how I understand it, I don't know if this is true, is that the Mark Group's withhold game was to push people into buying something. The authentic beginning, it was to get information and to push someone like, tell me something withheld, John, there's something I withheld from you. Okay, would you like to tell me? I see that you're really suffering in your relationship with your woman there. And I think, she looks really unhappy. And I think there's so much more you can do as a man. Thank you. It's a sales thing. They did it to sell.
Yeah.
And so here we are 50 years later, with this practice still existing. And like you said, it's withhold in its optimal form, breaks the glass, that really thin or really thick sheet of glass that exists between two people. And you can say things that you've been holding on for a long time. And if the person receiving it has presence and grounding and tenacity and strength, they could be like, wow, that's their bullshit. That has nothing to do with me. Even if I'm the perpetrator, it's still their withheld judgment. In the best of moments, you could be like, oh, it's like the vomit came out and it's out of the system. Now we can clean this away and get reconnected. That's the best of moments. But in the less best of moments, I get hooked, and then I give you a withhold, and you get hooked, and then all of a sudden, we're slinging vomit at each other. And so the ability to communicate this with consent and clarity, and I like how you said without projection, that's where the mastery of communication comes from. And very few people understand that we're trained to be mediocre communicators. We're not trained to be pristine communicators. We're trained to be mediocre communicators by society. And so very few people rise to the electric ability to communicate something that creates intimacy rather than destroys it.
Wow.
That was well said.
Really well
Very
said.
well
And it
said.
has me like, I want to be in that group of communicators. Like,
Yeah.
that's what I'm striving toward.
Aspirational.
Yeah,
I,
it's possible.
I wonder, like, especially through the not just the training and OneTaste, but also it seems like your overall arc and personal development. I noticed that there seems to be like an erotic component that is a major part of the practice. And yeah, I'm curious, especially being the Eros series, why do you think that erotic energy is so like powerful for doing things like making us better communicators, making that might not seem initially like all that connected to the erotic, or like being able to rather than project, being able to just be present and honest. Those things don't seem deeply connected, but maybe they
Wow.
are.
Yeah, there's so many ways to answer that question. First and foremost is that sexuality has been persecuted for the majority of our societal remembrance. Here we are in 2024, and our relationship to sexuality is significantly different than when we started in 2004, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
There was no one, and any group that was talking about sexuality was underground, like Moore. Even like Masters and Johnson, like all these studies had this sort of fringe, you're a weirdo. If you look at when did like gay marriage get legalized? 2012 in San Francisco. Transgender politics 20 years ago, like they were the freaks, and now it's being taught in schools, which is a whole other conversation. But just we have very short memories that until about 10 years ago, sexuality was very much persecuted. There are viewpoints, I'm not saying if I agree or disagree, that this OneTaste trial is a persecution of sexuality trying to rise. That's the viewpoint of OneTaste. Like, this is a persecution by society, and I don't want to talk too much about that. But the point is that there's so much energy, there's so much powerful creation energy, and there's so much powerful destructive energy in our sexuality. I was a kid of the 70s and 80s. You know, sex was, if you look at the movies and the shame that we connect to sexuality is just so intense, and it still happens today. We haven't burned that shame off. The point is that we're getting some more air in terms of sexuality. So OneTaste, one of our original taglines was a clean, clear space to investigate your orgasm. There were places for mental health and physical health and spiritual health. There was nowhere for sexual health. There's a bookstore in San Francisco, a clean, I don't remember the exact title, but it was actually called A Clean, Clear Space for Books or something like that. It was this really elegant bookstore on Van Ness. And that's one of the models that Nicole picked. We want to bring sexuality out so people can confront, just start it by confronting the power, the desire of our sexuality. And then can you encompass that? Can you judo that power into self-development? And the best successes, myself included, of OneTaste is where someone was able to harness the power of their sexuality for good and for empowerment and for connection for God and the ability to hear messages and see. And the relationship I have with Morgan, who's my second wife, so benefited by all that work.
Yeah, I'm wondering, could you talk more about like how you did do that judo? I'm imagining it of like reducing these chains of shame around sex, and then it unleashes this like kundalini energy that's free and ready. The dragon is ready, but then somehow you have to ride the dragon. I'm wondering what that even looks like.
There are 1,000 steps on that journey. I look at the boy like who started this practice in 1999. I do say boy deliberately. I was 29 years old, who thought he knew everything and knew nothing, especially about women. So cocky, so arrogant, so privileged, so white male, 29, yuppie. Like I cringe at what those boy thought and said, the chauvinism, the misogynism, but I don't blame him because that's who he was. That's what he grew up in. He was a kid of New York. I'm a firstborn Jew born in New York in the 1970s. Of course I was misogynistic. Of course I was chauvinistic. That's who I was born and bred to be. And I had the good fortune to meet a teacher that just Erwan Devan from San Francisco, who just had the kindness to say, hey, basically, you're an asshole. Do you want to keep being an asshole? And I said, no. And he said, all right, then walk these 1,000 steps to get to where you are at 54, where you actually have a clue. So that's kind of the general thing. And in a specific, one of my favorite things that I learned was the power of self-approval. And I write about this in the book a lot. Men, I'm just going to say men. I think women have their own version of it. I'll just focus on men for a second. Men are approval-seeking junkies. We look externally for validation that we are good men. We do this with sex. We do this in relating. We do this with work. We do this with fortune. You can see it across the spectrum. Men are just looking externally. Am I good enough? Am I good enough? Am I good enough? And we're constantly employing, hiring, demanding, cajoling validation from external sources, mostly from women. We're paying them, sometimes with cash, sometimes with energy and attention, to reflect back to us that we're sexy, we're smart, we're worth it. And so the biggest practice I learned around 2007, about 3 years in, was like self-approval, where I said, I am enough, regardless of anything I do, of how much sex I have, of how many women want me, blah, blah, blah. I just had this moment of like, I am enough. And then guess what happened? Because I had found that confidence, because I had found that self-empowerment, I'd found my own nuclear power plant inside, women were mystified and intrigued. What? You're not trying to glam onto me? You're not like Calvin and Hobbes, where Hobbes tackles Calvin. You're not trying to grip. And that changed everything. Because then I learned, oh, wow, the attention from women is beautiful and magical, but I don't need it. And so again, the ability to be in the, as my teacher, Justin Patrick Pierce, who I highly recommend, in London for the show, really the best out there at the moment, you know, instead of guys grasping, we're standing straight with our energy, with our spine solid, with our presence. John Wineland is another great teacher out there that does this, just standing straight. And then once I had that self-approval, the whole world changed.
I have two follow-up questions, or one comment and then a question.
Yeah.
Comment is, I'm just imagining that experience. I think I've had similar experiences where it's like it just kind of it's like you can rationally know about self-approval and, oh, I should love myself and I should accept myself. But then there's like this experience and now you have self-approval. Like there was you that didn't have it, and then there's you that actually has it in your cells, like in your bones, in your entire being. And my follow-up question to that is, did that last? Like, do you still feel like was that a lasting thing that stayed with you? And I'm asking because I've had similar experiences, and I'm like, is this gonna last, or am I gonna like float back into?
I'll answer that question with a really strange analogy that Nicole liked to use. It's about morel mushrooms. Morel mushrooms are a type of mushrooms that you go and hunt. And the story is, I did not have this experience, but the story is you go out hunting and you're in a field full of morel mushrooms. You can't see any of them. But then you see one, then you can see all of them. Once I touched into that moment of self-approval, and I remember the exact moment, I remember the specific moment where I felt it, I then had a reference. I then had the experience of it. Some people have these moments where they see God or see beauty or nature, whatever word, when you just feel that divine for a second, and then you remember, unless you intentionally forget. I did not intentionally forget, but I remember that moment. So then I had the path to find it again. Since that moment, have I lost touch of that for a moment? Of course. Thousands or 10,000s or 100,000s of moments where I've forgotten my center. But then I knew the map where I could always get back. And so the answer is yes, I can always find, in the best of moments, I can find my way back. In my worst of moments, my belief is that I want to have the experience of forgetting. So I can be in misery, I can be in my dark side, I can be in my shadow. There's some lesson for me to be here. And I'm there for X amount of time, hopefully not too long. And then I come back to my master, and my master's like, oh yeah, remember that touch point? Oh yeah. And I'm like, you know, my wife and I, most magical person I've ever met in my life, best friends, sexy, smart, my life partner. But we always say to each other, if we wake up tomorrow and this isn't the right for both of us, we're going to shake hands, hug, thank each other, and find that next thing. And I truly believe that every moment choosing that this is how I want to live my life is from that moment where I don't need my wife, I want my wife. And this has our relationship, the investigation of our relationship go deeper and deeper, even through the rough times. And we did have some really intense rough times. So yes, it's a touch point you can always go back to.
That last thing you said really struck me, this dynamic of like there's this fundamental difference between needing and wanting.
Yeah.
And it's like if I have to have this person around to fulfill like my basic needs, and like I couldn't make it without them, there's no room for erotic desires for like to join in that kind of creative communion together. And that's fascinating.
Which is exactly like what you had said before, like that the moments preceding that, you know, that revelation was that there was this needing that was this neediness that was getting in the way. And then once that's removed, it just opens up this space to like really be able to see the other, like, and to see yourself, like, and there's this, you know, there's this differentiation, and that allows the appreciation, allows like the fullness of experience of other. It's, I'm loving this conversation. I'm like over here just vibrating with excitement. Like,
well, There's a book, Codependence No More, Melanie Beattie, classic. And the introduction, she's basically like, hey, society is trained you to be codependent. You are trained to be codependent. That is the water that we swim in.
Yeah.
We don't know anything different unless we rise above the water and be like, oh. So yeah, you're trained as a person in Western society. I do not know other societies well, but in Western society to be codependent, you're trained. I need you. You complete me. I mean, how many? Just listen to love songs. You're getting the subliminal messages every single day that you are incomplete without another. It takes incredible agency to swim upstream, to go against the grain, to be like, I am 100% solid without another person, which is going to make you very attractive to another person because they're going to try to be codependent with you. And you're like, no, thank you. Like, do you want to work on yourself? I'll work on with you and we could be two path partners on this dynamic adventure. But yeah, you are trained 100% by society to be codependent.
Right. Like, oh, there's the feminine and the masculine and they meet and then they've made one complete thing when really it's that dynamic internally that's
Right.
like finding that balance, which I think you talked about in Unhidden as well. Like
the ratio.
Like the ratio. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's this way that neediness, it collapses your understanding of boundaries between you and the object of desire, and that there's like it requires two holes to have an erotic relationship, to have this productive relationship, for things to relate. They can't like squish together and become, we have to be one thing.
Right.
No separation. That's the end. I don't know. I'm like still tripping out on that.
Yeah. I mean, I broke all my father's rules. And my father disowned me when I was 30. Literally, in the Jewish tradition, he ripped his clothes. He disowned me when I was 30 because I was heading off into this path of exploring. And it was the hardest thing and one of the most important things that happened, because then I stopped being someone who almost identified as son of Joe, just being to Robert Kandell, who has a father named Joe.
Right.
And so that's what we do to each other. We capture and we imprison, especially in a relationship. We imprison people who we think they should be. And if they break the rules, they're the bad person. I wrote about in the first chapters of the book, I love this. Had a client who was a high-end escort, high-end, $800 to $1,500 per hour escort. And one time she said to me, my clients would rather be doing the things with me with their wives. And I was like, really? Like I'm imagining an older middle-aged woman. I'm looking at that beautiful, sexy New York thing. And she's like, yeah, they would much rather be doing these scenes and these experiences with their wife. But because their wife won't even talk to them about it or acknowledge it, he has to come to me and pay me $800 to $1,500 an hour. And I was like, whoa, that's what we do. We create all these overt and mostly covert rules. And if another person breaks it, then they're the bad person and they're penalized. So Unhidden is about, okay, show me your rules. Show me your shadows. Show me your dark side. I once told my wife I watched porn. This was a long time ago. That was a very scary thing because I knew she had a lot of judgments around them about porn. And I had hidden it my entire life from every single person. And she received me. And she said, that bothers me, but I'm glad you told me. And then this whole new intimacy got created. And I stopped watching porn. Because I don't know exactly, it wasn't exactly a causality event, but that was the first time I felt freedom, to be honest. So these magic moments.
The container is now closed. Wow, what a discussion. So next week, we'll be with Robert Kandell still, and we're gonna cover controversial issues like the rise of pornography and the way that has affected the erotic and human sexuality in general, particularly male sexuality. Again, you can find Robert Kandell's website, robertkandell.com. Find your financial forecast at yourff.io. To learn more about the relational arts like circling, authentic relating, nonviolent communication, you know what to do, folks. thecontainerpod.com. There you can also find links to our Patreon where you can begin supporting the podcast with small monthly donations. We have a nice way of closing. Keep it namaste.